So, welcome everybody. So, I really am delighted this morning that I'm talking to soil ecologist Dr. Sandra Trzynska. We've had a lovely chat before on a last webinar, and this time we wanted like a deeper exploration and a more sort of free-flowing conversation about living soil and how the life within it shapes absolutely everything that we depend on, really. I think most of you know me, but for those who don't and who are going to be listening on YouTube, I'm Vicky and I founded the Soil Squad, a community interest company in 2003. In St Albans here in the UK, and we're a community composting organisation with a really simple mission, essentially to improve soil health so that we can grow more nutrient dense food, and to do that together as a community. And it's lovely to see so many of those volunteers here with us today. So last year, I was really proud to say that the Soil Squad grew a team of 15 volunteers. And between us, we diverted and transformed around 2.5 tons of food waste into living compost. And we shared soil health education and practical composting tools with over 700 people. So that was a really good achievement for that first year. And while that still matters really deeply, and we're still going to be continuing that, this year in 2026, I felt a really strong pull to go even deeper into soil, beyond the what we do, into the why we do it. Why does all of this matter? Because all of us maybe can feel that something is under strain, maybe. Human health is continuing to feel more fragile, and chronic illness we know is rising. Mental health feels like it's declining. And whilst our food might look abundant, it can feel less nourishing. And all of the ecosystems that we depend on, we know are sort of quietly fraying away at the edges. And what struck me is how closely all of that mirrors what's actually happening beneath our feet. And the soil, like people, is losing resilience. But does soil itself ultimately have the solution? So, to dive into this, I would really love to introduce Dr. Sandra Trzynska. Sandra is an agricultural scientist who specialises in soil microbiology, mycology, and ecology. She lives in Australia, so it's coming over the airwaves to us today. And she's dedicated her career to researching and sharing the extraordinary ways to enhance soil fertility and resilience. So, Sandra, welcome. I'm going to make our screens a little bit bigger and hand over to you. And perhaps, Sandra, kick us off with a question of when did you first fall in love with soil, and what was the moment you realised that it was alive?
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks so much. It's lovely to hear about Soil Squad as well and just how much work you guys are putting into it. I was a kid, I used to watch my grandparents work in the garden on their little allotment in Poland in the communist time. And they just used to grow their own food. A lot of people did, just to supplement what they could get on their rations. And I was just sort of playing. I never got to weed or anything, but I was playing in the soil and I was taking out worms. I was finding lots of worms. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I just fell in love with the earthworms. So that was my first time realizing that the soil, it should be full of creatures and that there's life within. Other than that, I never really thought much beyond it until I did my PhD and was looking at the symbiotic relationship between fungi and roots and how fungi feed root systems and plants, these symbiotic fungi. And that was another sort of like a gateway to just completely fall in love with soil. Another thing that really sort of spoke to me as well was studying the rhizobium relationship, the little nodules that get formed on legumes. And that was early part of my agricultural science degree. So it was before my PhD that I realized, wow, there's all this bacterial interaction and it's symbiotic and it works with the root and it's fixing nitrogen. So I was always interested, just interested in general in microbial and other life forms, animals, everything that's alive. So the great thing is that soils also have a lot of creatures that should be there, mostly microscopic, but also larvae of insects and other things, and worms and different types of worms as well, like nematodes, for example, which are microscopic worms. So that grew really past my PhD, and more recently when I did Elaine Ingham's course on soil microbiology, and it just got me back into microscopy because I kind of didn't have that microscopy use between my PhD and more recently. And so I just love it because it's like you get to see it as soon as you put it under the microscope, you see whether it's alive or not. There's no lies, there's nothing in between. There's just it's there or it isn't. And I love that truth telling of what that can do, microscopy can do. Just like you look at a forest and you can kind of tell and have a sense of, is it biodiverse? Is it lacking? Is there one species dominating? Are there lots of weeds? Exactly the same thing happens in soil.
And I know, Sandra, that you were really generous and you've created your YouTube channel, similar to kind of Elaine Ingham's Soil Science, and you share so much of this over, I think it's over 50 tutorials, isn't it? So, and you did share a little bit of that in our last, well, a whole hour of it in our last talk as well. So, for anybody that's listening today and is really interested in that element and wants to really dive into the secret life within soil, do go and either check out Sandra's YouTube channel or have a look at that recording that's on your YouTube channel and on the Soil Squad CIC YouTube channel as well. Because it's fascinating, isn't it? And I think Sandra, the kind of what would be really interesting is we know that all of those tiny beings are in the soil, but how, just very briefly, kind of how does that create? I know it's kind of a huge conversation, but can you summarize for people why are they important and how does that create fertility and structure in the soil, and a resilient ecosystem?
That's a great question. So yeah, the soil restoration course is where all the details are, and that's literally called the soil restoration course is the name of the YouTube channel that I created. Everything related to soil that I've learned is on there, and it's quite scientific and it's exciting at the same time because then it translates into current agricultural practices and how damaging they are versus what can we do and what is it all about. So what really it is all about in the soil, you can have soil, which we could call soil, but really it's kind of dirt because without life, it's not soil. So what makes it soil is the life forms. So you can have sand, silt, and clay particles, and they're all full of minerals. And it doesn't matter where you are on Earth, all soils have all the minerals that possibly could be there, even when we say they're deficient. Soils cannot be deficient because they come from a parent rock material, and that rock oftentimes, if not all the time, has all the minerals present, just in different amounts. So this is what happens. The biology then, when bacteria and fungi particularly, they're the pioneers of the soil ecosystem, particular bacteria to start with, what they do is they are able to munch on those mineral particles, sand, silt, and clay. And as they munch on it, they dissolve it with enzymes, and that releases minerals. And so those organisms, fungi and bacteria, become rich in those minerals. And when they are full of them, you can wait till they die and they will burst and leave their contents, and that will feed the plant directly. Or something has to eat them in order to release those excess nutrients because they're the most nutrient rich organisms that eat them will always have to poo out the excess. And that is what fertilizes our plants. That is how forests are fertilized. That is how every natural ecosystem is fertilized. In addition, these organisms like bacteria and fungi create glues, you can say, substances that they release to hold on to the mineral particles, to the sand, silt, and clay. And to grow on those and to be able to hold on and not be washed out with rain, they create a lot of different glues. And these glues create the potential for soil particles to now stick together into either microaggregates, which bacteria, because they're so tiny, 1 micrometer in diameter, they create these tiny little bits of particles sticking together. And when they do that, they excrete their nutrients into there, they communicate with one another. They have a life between those little particles. They have shelter and water can be held in there. And then fungi, because they're much larger and they grow in a very lengthy form, they actually spread like the mycelium of the fungi, and they're called hyphae, the long cells, which becomes visible as mycelium, and they actually hug soil particles together. These microaggregates that bacteria have created, now they conglomerate those into macroaggregates. And that is the exciting part. And that, of course, creates spaces within the soil. So roots can get through, worms can get through, moisture can get through, air can get through, which is essential. So these beautiful aggregates that both bacteria and fungi create are essential for our soil structure, creating this spongy effect. And that is wonderful. And that is exactly what this life does. Without the life, no aggregates are possible. And without that life, we have water issues, we have oxygen issues in the soil. So it is the life forms that make soil what it is.
So if we take that to say, we venture out into our garden after this talk, or we go and have a look on our allotment, what's the difference? So, what can you say is soil without life? I'd imagine we're calling that dirt. What does that look like as opposed to what we're calling soil with this diverse life inside? Just to make sure that we know what we're talking about here.
So, like if you go to the beach and you have sand, that's lifeless. And when I say lifeless, that's not exactly correct. There'll be organisms there that are adapted to live in that sand and also to be able to deal with the fact that salt is present because of the ocean having salt content. There will be some life forms, I'm sure of it. There will be bacteria, bacteria always present. But soil, when we've got also organic matter added into it, that's another huge component. So plants leaving their debris, their roots dying underground, also feeding the system while they're alive. When you combine the organic matter with the organisms, because mind you, they can't feed, these organisms cannot just survive on minerals, they actually require the carbon as well from the organic matter. This is really, it's the plants really that are the key components supplying the carbon to the fungi and the bacteria. So the soil should always be covered with plants, as plants are always the main component feeding the soil ecosystem. So when you go to the desert, the soil will also have life, but if you pick it up, it will be like dust. You blow on it and it blows away. And that's a problem. And you often see that in agricultural systems where you can see a plow going through and the soil is up in the air, and that's what's causing erosion. The soil life is getting killed as we plow, and it all flies off into the atmosphere. You can pick up a clay soil and it might not have much life in it either. So if you close your hand on it, it will just become really, really hard, sort of like Play-Doh, like dough. And then bread itself had the microbial part incorporated into it, which is the yeast, which is similar to soil microbial action, kind of allows oxygen penetration. It fluffs up like a sponge. So really soil, when it has good microbial biodiversity, as well as organic matter, it's like a fluffy substance. It's fluffy, it's dark because the organic matter has been transformed by the microbes from plants and dying insects and everything, and it becomes humus. And humus is really the transformed product once fungi and bacteria and all the other life forms have had their go at extracting all the carbon that they can possibly use and all the nitrogen from that. And this is the beauty of that. It's basically this beautiful, fluffy, dark, nice smelling, really lovely smell, fungal smell. Oftentimes you can go to a mulch pile and have that nice smell of fungi, and soil, if it's really rich, like in the forest situation, will have that same smell. It will be kind of like compost mixed with a bit of mineral component like the sands, silt and clay. So that's what it should feel like as far as I know.
I mean, it's just there's like it resonates in your gut, doesn't it? Like when you kind of come across that soil, when you create that type of soil, for me, it's just like, oh, it just really like gets me in my stomach, you know. I just the difference between that, if you kind of approach some land that was kind of dusty, dry, very mineral based, you know, and then it converts into that rich humus soil life and aeration, and also the sense of absorbing water, like what happens to that compacted, ploughed land when the rain falls on it. And that's why we're getting all the flash flooding through kind of like monocropping, harvesting, extraction, ploughing through, even, in a small scale, even on an allotment, if you're kind of asking that soil to work all the time, as opposed to soil that's rested and nourished. Could you talk a little about that as well?
I forgot to mention also that with the sand, it just falls apart. With the clay, it stays together. And then if you've got organic matter, where organic matter is present and microbial life is present, it will fall into these aggregates I spoke of at the beginning. In your hand, you will crunch it, and then when you open it, it will just fall into this lovely, separated but yet together a sponge. And because of the spongy effect, just like bread, it will actually absorb like a sponge moisture into it, and it will also not allow the moisture to degrade the soil. It won't, the soil will actually just absorb it and hold it, and that's just a key function of a healthy ecosystem that soil should be, is this spongy effect. And of course when we plow, we're just destroying those mycelial threads, those hyphae of fungi, and also bacteria get then exposed to sunlight that kills them immediately. So we're just killing all the life forms, not to mention the predatory organisms like nematodes and then the earthworms, which are eating all of the above, all of the smaller components of the ecosystem. So they all get basically killed. You can imagine big machinery with big, fast and heavy duty compactions happening as well, but also the blades themselves actually slice everything up. So it's not a good system. You don't see that happening in nature. There is no plowing. There's little bits of digging by various organisms, various bigger creatures, and they create little holes and rain falls. They capture moisture. They help the ecosystem. But when we do continuous plowing instead of lasagna farming, which could be done with stubble retention, there's all these beautiful methods that can be implemented, and we can still grow mass produce food. But because of the wanting to have control over nature, and because we want to extract things from it, like you said earlier, sort of mine it rather than give to it. This is like the biggest problem, is we're not giving to it and letting it feed us. We're taking from it, demanding that it feeds us. There's a huge difference in how we feel about the system. And because our systems at the moment on Earth are very much take. If we can't take from this country anymore because we've already taken everything, we move on to another country and demand that their produce comes to us, particularly in Western versus third world countries. So it's this lack of generosity we've taken rather than given. And in the forest, when once again, if we compare it to nature, nature grows, it doesn't compete. It's actually completely symbiotic in a really healthy forest. Everything gives to one another and everything collaborates, everything communicates, and it also works together in cooperation in order to feed the entire system. So because it's based on giving, obviously no one fertilizes the soil in the forest. It fertilizes itself via this constant giving. And of course it takes what it needs, but it never takes more than it needs. And this is another thing we do. We like to hoard, and we, all these things that we created in man-made systems are depleting the ecosystem, from soil all the way up to forests, all the way to how we eat, produce food. So it's definitely possible to completely change that, especially if our hearts change towards it and we understand it. And then if we experiment with it and we go, hey, what's going to happen if I just put mulch there and just see the difference, just experimentally? There's so much we can do to actually just see how nature is designed to give back to us and to take care of us. And all we do, we might just put a seed in the soil. And that's the crazy thing. We don't do anything. We might just be putting a seed in the soil. That's as far as our input has been. And the amount we get back is just phenomenal. And I think if we start to appreciate that, we can probably start working on why we condone these practices that are totally unfruitful and destructive and actually poisonous to the environment, to the soil, and to us. Because that's another thing. We also use chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, and that all kills all the microbial life. And people say it doesn't, but it really does. It diminishes the diversity. And when the diversity is gone, this is when struggles start to begin in the system. And we are then reliant on more junk food, on more chemicals, and that makes the farmer reliant financially. And then we wonder why food costs so much, because it's no longer a gift, it's now a commodity. It's now being stressed, it's now being modified, and you guys are well aware of genetic even modification of plants. All of these things are just wrong, and they eventually cause destruction of the whole system. Eventually we lose it because we haven't appreciated it. Yeah, but change is possible. As you know, I've been talking about a project as well, we've spoken with you about, and that's about giving to the soil. And we can talk about that later, but yeah.
Oh, I mean, there's just so much there. I'd love to sort of go deeper in and talk about and extract. And like you said, we definitely will come to your sort of practical project and kind of. I know that there's lots of growers in the audience as well, so kind of sharing those kind of practical how you can change it yourself. I think before we get to that, it really resonates what you're saying to me about kind of extraction, about the plough, about fertilizer, and about sort of this sense of feeding the world rather than just feeding our village, and how that kind of like in a in abundance of food has kind of we've lost the nutrient density, and our soils are full of sort of microplastics. Our our oranges, our apples are coated with chemicals and fertilizers and fungicides. What's that? I know that you'd kind of be able to explore that. How does that affect the plant nutrition and therefore the human health? What's happening there in our guts, the microbiome of our guts, and the microbial life within plants as well.
Yeah, there's more and more studies now showing that soil that's poor in microbiology is very much related to very poor gut health, and we're losing species in our gut. And a lot of the microbial organisms that are in the soil actually survive the gut and end up colonizing our colon. So, for example, B12, we're being told that you have to eat meat to have B12 and all that. Really, B12 is actually a microbial byproduct. So if the bacteria are allowed to live in our gut, they live in our ileum and they produce B12 for us. So we don't need to eat or kill anything. We need to just have the microbes feeding us once again. So it starts with healthy soil. Those organisms have to be present, and then we have to eat the food from that soil, and those organisms will be present on that food. And same with the vitamins and minerals, trace amounts that are required. And once again, our food should be able to provide that, because the bacteria and the fungi produce their own vitamins and everything. So without those organisms in the soil, we can't get those things from the food. And this is why there's so much money being made through supplements being made in the lab and people taking those supplements. And those foods that we consume, even if they were produced to feed the world, as you said, it would be a good thing, but they produce to create profit. And this is the biggest crux of the problem. And I know a lot of farmers actually feel like very responsible, and they feel like we need to feed the world, but no one's giving to the farmer the equipment they need for them to actually grow it. Like, imagine if governments, or even we did as communities, and I've seen projects like that out there, where you support the farmer, you pay the farmer a wage through community means, and they are passionate about the food, so they produce it and then they give it. So you're paying him over time, but then you get produce that's organically grown and well grown. So there could be systems set up like that, where we decentralize it from the major giant companies that are just there for the money. And if it comes down to the money, you will just pump out the fertilizers, pump out the pesticides, but then you're eating poison. And you also notice that, for example, greens that are grown, they look really good, like spinach or whatever. They look good when they're pumped with nitrogen, chemical nitrogen, but the taste is not good. And also they're sick, and they're open to plagues of organisms. And insects, when they fly over paddocks, if it's naturally grown with loads of microbial diversity, they won't even look at that paddock. They will go and sit on the paddock and decimate it. When the plants are signaling, I'm sick, I'm dying anyway, all this alcohol is produced within the cells of the plant, and the insects can see that, and this is where they go to. So we can literally, by just giving to the soil in the first place, we can literally prevent all the diseases and insect infestations that are out there of all these plants that we're trying to grow. We don't have to use any genetically modified plants. And then the inputs, there's no more inputs for the farmer. So they don't need to put as much water because the sponge effect is happening. They don't need to buy artificial fertilizers, which are super, super expensive to produce. Electricity is required on large amounts. So there's a lot of depletion of resources to create these substances that are not natural. And then our plants, when they fed through, how they always have been, microbes, via the microbes pooing out their waste, it changes everything. It really does.
I think, Sandra, we could do a whole other talk on regenerative agriculture, and there's a real swathe of movement in the UK that are really actively doing it, and generational, that kind of that flux between the kind of father farmer and the son, and often quite a lot of, well, actually regenerative farmers have been in existence for years and years and years, and they're handing down their wisdom, and there's lots of new life coming in exploring alternative ways to kind of foster our soils. And there's a beautiful festival in the UK called Groundswell that I go to, and as a complete imposter syndrome, but I just find it absolutely fascinating. 2 days, and it's really sort of hopeful, kind of people who are coming together. I think it used to be 400 people, and now it's near on 20,000 people who come to share sort of, Korean natural farming methods. And but that's like agricultural, that's like out there. And actually, if you're just like me and you just have an allotment, or you have a patch on your in your garden, or you have pots on your balcony, sometimes that's more manageable, to kind of do. If you kind of create the life within your own patch, that's just good for your mental health, good to be able to know that you're doing what you can in your area. And that's very much how I want to be with Soul Squad, is just promoting positivity in your own area, in your own town, in your own patch, on your own plot. Um, and I thought maybe we could use the next sort of 15 minutes to actually talk about that, because I know that a lot of the people on the call, that's what they're here for. It's like, what can we do if we can't sort of sort out the monocropping agriculturally? What can I do in my garden? And what I wanted to start off with was, I spoke to you last week, and you were telling me about your community garden food distribution idea in Australia, and the revolutionary way that you're starting it, in a real commitment to soil health. And I absolutely love this, and would love this to be part of our, really, I'd love it to be part of our allotment rules and regulations, because over here in the UK, if you have an allotment plot, you have to cultivate 75% within a year, and there's this pressure to do so. Well, you're kind of like inheriting a plot that might have had pesticides, fertilizers on it. It might be dirt, it might have just mineral, bacterial life, and that's it. And you're expected to regenerate that within a year and start growing. And I just love your alternative to that. And I would love to share that with everyone here, and also with our council, to be honest with you as well, Sandra. So can you tell us the story about that?
So, you know how I mentioned at the beginning or halfway through that it's all about raping and pillaging the way the agriculture is. And really, I think it's back to basics. The beauty of your own input and becoming self-sustainable and growing food so we don't have to rely on these poor farmers. And in fact, farmers can go, hey, maybe I can change my ways because maybe I don't need to be just working so hard and then having a failed crop and committing suicide, because that happens a lot where I live. Just generationally, farmers have been expected to feed Australia, and this is a big agricultural area. And so, therefore, a lot of them, when there's a drought or a flood and they lose their income, they just feel so disappointed. And oftentimes, there's this side effect of high suicide rate in farmers. And that's partly because we expect so much. But if we didn't expect so much, but as you say, took personal responsibility, even if it means growing on our balcony something, a tomato plant, whatever, that changes a lot. And I think that interaction The soil creates the connection with just the fact that there's this gift that you just put a tiny seed in and then this huge thing grows and you can eat it and it's just delicious and it tastes better than anything you've had from the shop. I think that in itself is like just really gets your heart touched. It's a heart moment. It's not just mouth and palate and gut. It's like this whole thing that happens. And I think for children to have that experience is like the best thing, taking them away from technology and doing that. But so this is where the God's Way organization that I volunteer for, we've got a piece of land that has been donated that has terraces made, so to capture water, because we live in a very, very low rainfall area. And they're only like probably 20 meters by 20 meter plots, you could say, within a terrace. So the principle of it is that you create walls and you create a very leveled ground. And that is the crux of it in this case as well, because if you just grow without the terrace in this area, that already creates a problem of having to over irrigate. So in dry situations, a terrace is a wonderful idea. And I can send you links if you guys want. I can share those links with you as to how the terraces are formed, how they've been created, because God's Way organization wants to share everything we do for free with the world so that people can emulate and copy and actually do the same. But the principles of it are all about gifting. So we want to grow food for free for people. We want to be self-sustainable in the sense that we're not relying on farmers. We don't have to drive to the shops, but we can create enough food in the future, not only for ourselves, but also to share with others on a large scale. But also it's about feeding wildlife. So it's not about excluding wildlife, but creating equal amounts of food for wildlife, because wildlife is what sustains us in the end as well, because it creates the ecosystem and it's a whole ecosystem thing and we fit into that ecosystem. But first and foremost, it's damaged soil. It's been farmed for long periods of time. It had cattle on it for a number of years. We don't know what else has been done to that soil. And it's heavy, very heavy clayey soil, but very fertile, mind you. It's red soil. So the mineral component is very fertile. It's just that there's no life in it at the moment. And I shouldn't say at the moment, because my last analysis on the microscope has shown that life is returning and it's growing over time as we implement the gifting to the soil. So because we're all human, raised in this taking society, we started on the wrong foot as well. And our leader, who is called Jesus, who's the mastermind behind the terraces design and the food production project, he actually said, guys, what are you doing? You're doing it completely the way everyone else has done it, because we were just doing the project, planting trees into this dirt, into this clay. And all of us had feelings like, this is wrong, because we knew that the design was for us to feed the soil, but we didn't do it. We sort of started to want the goods to come out. So a couple of people bought fruit trees, and then we started designing how can we make the trees grow. And then he's like, oh, let's have a meeting about this. What are we doing? What is driving us? Why are we no longer adhering to this principle of giving to the soil first? So we backtracked and we decided, okay, the first thing we've got to do is let's feed the soil. What have we got on hand? So we've got mulch, giant piles of mulch that we get from a sawmill. So God's Way organization pays for that. It's wood chip ground into quite large and smaller pieces. So it's kind of like a mix. And because it's been stored for a long time and we've got that resource, Jesus suggested to use the most decomposed wood chip to feed the soil. But not only on top of the soil, but we're trying to incorporate it. So actually move it through the soil profile, but without causing too much damage to the soil. And because we haven't got the machinery yet, we have a friend, one of our volunteers, he's got a little excavator. We will load the mulch with the excavator onto a truck. We bring it over to the field and then we put it on the piles and then he distributes it. And everyone will be different. You might not have that resource. This is just an example. In this situation, we've got this, we've got the excavator and we're sort of incorporating it. He picks it up and sort of inverts it, but gently, so you don't do too much disturbance. Now we're on our third cycle in the 3 terraces. The soil that was the worst, because it got delivered the most decomposed mulch, is now the best. So we're seeing trends that we didn't expect, but we knew that we started with really good decomposed mulch with giant grubs in it that are larvae of rhinoceros beetles that grow this big, these fat grubs. And I looked at their poo under the microscope, and their poo has got so much fungal spores. So their poo is really good. And they munch on the wood. They actually eat the fungi, obviously. So all these organisms are already present in that mulch. So that means when we incorporate it, once it gets mixed with the soil and rains come, it starts to decompose faster, and the organisms start to infiltrate the soil now. And then we grow cover crops. So my friend who leads the project, Diane, she keeps researching what multi-species cover crops can we use to get the nitrogen, to get as much biomass as possible. And then when the plants, just before they start seeding, we whippersnip them with a, I don't know what you guys call it, like a brush cutter or a whippersnipper, like a machine that just cuts grass normally. But we whippersnip it down, and then Rob comes with his excavator, puts mulch down and incorporates the biomass. So we're on our third cycle now. The soil is unsurprised. These organisms that I was hoping for that would appear, like the predators of fungi or bacteria, are now starting to appear in the soil. So it's working. And now we're going to also introduce a pump from a dam that's been designed for that dam to actually use that water. And we're going to start watering. We haven't added any water, and we've been through a drought and also through a little bit of a flood situation. So all that impacts the soil. But in 3 years' time, we hope to have really deep, lovely soil that we've spoken about today.
So just to recap, so you're mulching with wood chip and kind of incorporating that into the soil already. You're growing cover crops, and then in the UK we might call that chop and drop. So then you leave that to compost on the surface.
Yep. We incorporate that as well.
And then like the
Yeah, so when we chop and drop, that also gets incorporated. That's the difference between doing like a lasagna garden. We want to build the soil. So we, unfortunately, right now we want to invert it in a way. And it's not an inversion in the way that agriculture does it with plows, because we're just sort of scooping it up and turning it over just so that mulch and the cover crop's got the nitrogen in it. So usually the carbon and nitrogen is what's important, just like with composting. So you need the contact between the cover crop residue, which is the nitrogen, with the mulch's high carbon content. When those combine plus the mineral component of the soil, now you've got all the components working together to feed and create the life forms. When I say create, they're there, their spores are in the air, they just have to land, and there's always something already in the soil, ready, pregnant with life. But oftentimes it's dormant and waiting for the right conditions. I hope that I'll be able to demonstrate this over weekly or whatever monthly videos, just so people can get an appreciation for, yes, it takes work now to recover what we've damaged. We've damaged it so much that for it to recover, it's not an overnight process. And you can use plants in your allotment gardens. So even though they expect you to have a plant cover crop growing, it can be like sunflowers or something, or like a multi-species crop. Definitely you can grow it, because there are plants that are more sort of generous rather than taking. But if you're always going to chop and drop, then you're always giving as well. So no matter what, through the plants, the mineral transformation will happen through the microbes. So you can do it like that. That's how normally people do it in regenerative agriculture. They use plants mostly to achieve that. It's just a slower process. And because we've got this amazing resource, we've added that as well.
So you're not really going to extract anything for up to 3 years. You're literally going to grow sort of polycropping, lots of different plant diversity.
Mm-hmm.
You chop and drop it back into the ground, that composts itself. You're taking you're soil testing every 6 months as well, aren't you, to track that?
Yeah, every time the crop grows, before we decide to chop and drop, I take a sample. So we've done 4 for one of the terraces now. Like I took a before and then one after the first crop, third, and up to the third crop. So I've got 4 in the one terrace. We started them at different times for various reasons, resources, and sometimes it's too wet in one of the terraces, so we can't do the work. We never put the machinery in there when the soil is too wet, because it causes all kinds of problems. And it's so interesting to watch, like that first terrace I'm talking about now, it had hardly any worms in it. There were hardly any worms when we dug it and tried to grow fruit trees in it. We did a lot of digging by hand so we could see what was in there. And then last sample I brought to test, I was like mixing the soil for the microscopy, And I'm like, oh, there's a little worm. So I picked him out. And then there was like 5 of them, little baby worms, starting to take hold. The fact that I was able to get them, even though like I wasn't digging deep anywhere, it just shows that life is
Yeah.
responding. Yeah, yeah. And quite quickly, because I think it's been February when we started last year. So it's been a year now. We're now in our first year of this process. Yeah.
Um, Oh, I could talk to you forever, Sandra. It's now nearly well, it's gone past 1:45. So I do invite any questions from anybody who's listening. If you want to put your question in the chat or, come on uh audio, get your camera on, feel free. We can just sort of have an open conversation if that's what is useful to you. I think whilst people do that and think about their question and write something in the chat, I just would like to ask you, um, if everybody that was listening to you now that is caring about their soil health, what's the one thing that they could do tomorrow or this afternoon that would make the biggest difference? Where do you start? What's the best place if you're coming at a brand new plot or a brand new house? Maybe often in the UK, houses are built on estates, and the soil health is just basically depleted. It's rubble. It's been, turned over by machinery. What's the thing how do you start?
Yeah, and I thought about this a lot before we had this chat. And, I always go for like, let's just worm farm. But what I would do actually is take it a step further and go, okay, make a decision that I'm never going to put any of my food scraps ever again into landfill. Because, 10% I think of greenhouse gas release comes from landfill gases that escape up because people put food in the rubbish. So if we just took out that en masse, if it was illegal to put food into our bins with plastic and everything else, we would drastically not contribute to this greenhouse gas release. And also the rot and the grossness that comes out of that. It's just really crazy that we do that because it came from the earth, we mined it out, we took all the nutrients, we took the skin off or whatever, or it's gone past its use by date, and then we throw it into the bin. Like it should go straight into the soil. So I think even if you don't compost or have a worm farm, even if you just decide, okay, I've got this really damaged piece of soil here, I would put all my scraps or even dig a hole, put my scraps in there and cover it with mulch. Get some mulch, I don't know, hay or whatever, or even cardboard. And I know that will attract critters, so you might want to make a hole. And in a dry area, you would want to make a hole. In a wet climate, you probably wouldn't have to. And I noticed that even if I put a bit of cardboard on the soil, the worms are under there always, even though you never see these worms in the dry, sandy soil that I live with. They just love it. And they like natural endemic composting worms that are just in the ground where I live. And any piece of food that you ever get, I remember doing this when I was at university, and I just didn't have the heart to put my scraps into the bin. So I would dig little holes around the university grounds wherever there was plants growing, and I would just put my scraps there. And if I didn't, because I didn't have time, I'd take them home with me and feed them to my worms. Yeah, I've just made this sort of pact with myself that I'm never ever going to put even the smallest piece of food in the bin. And it just like stuck forever. I just can't, it's like going against your, I don't know, some religion or something now for me. I've just become dedicated. And I just think it's just so natural to do that nowadays. I don't think about it. I
So
don't
one thing
even.
we can pack a tiny little shovel in our backpack or in our bag and wherever we go, just kind of dig our food waste or sort of anything that's left over. I love that. I love that.
Like even in your backyard or whatever, just chuck your food on the ground even and cover it with something and just see what happens. Just watch and observe and see what happens, and you'll find amazing things like fungal biomass growing. You'll just start seeing things that you have not seen before, and you always get a gift from it in return. So it's a cool thing to do.
One thing is just start today collecting your food waste. Ideally, eat as much as you can, buy as little as you need, and then keep everything. And create a compost heap or just dig it in the ground?
I would just dig it. Like the composting, if you don't know how to do the temperature thing, it becomes a little bit of a tricky thing, but I just prefer it like in the forest, trees drop their leaves and it just covers the ground, and that's what you do with it. And if you have any garden waste, you might put that over so that, animals don't get into it too much. and just keep creating a lasagna like that and see what happens. But if you need to dig a hole, go for it as well. It's probably good, because if you dig a lot of holes with a lot of food in it, your soil will love it.
Amazing. We've got one question. What would be one cover crop that you would recommend? And they say you could not think of a nicer and more hopeful way to spend a Sunday morning.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Yeah, well, the whole thing about cover crops is usually like diversity. So you often want to have something, depending on the soil, but if you have hardcore soil that we're working with at the moment, we grow deep rooted daikon radishes. So they sort of penetrate deep into the ground, and when they die, they're obviously a food source. Something that will dig for you and make holes in the ground and attract worms. That's like one type of cover crop. The other one would be to grow maybe a grass, if it can grow, something that's hardy with lots of fibrous roots. It's all about root diversity, really, in the end. Then another one would be a legume to fix nitrogen, so like a bean or a pea. Sunflower to attract pollinators, but also sunflowers extract a lot of toxins from the soil as well and transform them. So just a multi-species, whatever you can get your hand on. If you just type in multi-species cover crop into Google, you'll always find somewhere in your area there'll be someone selling some sort of a mix. But it's about diversity of plants. So yeah, grasses, vegetable sort of things that make bulky roots. And then you've got your a legume, and then anything that's fibrous. So just a mix, and it doesn't have to be that many as well. If you start with something.
Another question, it says from John. He says, I'd be really interested to hear about the community social fabric that ecological regeneration can knit together in Sandra's experience. How can grassroots work to gather momentum? Great question, John. Big one.
And I'm just super excited that that question got asked. But basically, I work for this organization called God's Way, and the whole of the principles of God's Way and why I even came to it was because I was learning about divine truth, which is the spiritual teachings from Jesus and Mary Magdalene, who are back on earth sharing God's truth. I was like, I want to see who these people are, because they're talking about environmental recovery, how if we connect to the creator of the universe and receive love from that creator, it will not only transform me, but also the environment around me. So I was like, I want to know, like, how does God, who I can see creation must be happening, how does this happen? And how can God, who loves, and if I connect to this being, I can see the effects of it in the environment. That was my experiment. I was like, I want to see if this is possible. And it took me ages and ages to accept in my heart that the principles were amazing, and that to live by them is to honor love, truth, humility, action, faith. It took me like over a decade. They created God's Way with some friends that were like really experimenting with these principles of love, and God's love in particular. So Jesus and Mary set up an education program to help others to develop the sincerity to love. We started meeting on a weekly basis to engage in different projects to see whether we can cooperate, really, like ants. And what we're discovering is that we don't want to. So what we're discovering, we're having lots of issues where people have their own ideas. I know better, like the tree planting we did in the dead soil. We don't want to give up our own staunch, false definitions of love. And that's what's happening for a lot of people. So it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And this is why I think a lot of organizations don't work out well, because they don't have some principles that drive them, that are like, okay, we're going to promise that we're going to work on how to be a loving person, and what does it mean to give, and do I expect something in return? All these sincere questions that we need to ask ourselves so that we can see where we're really at. And some people have developed these principles in their hearts, and what ends up happening is that they cooperate. So now, instead of having just volunteering days, we call it Humility in Practice Education Days. But instead of just those, we also have work days. So people that have already the principles in their hearts, we work on other projects like building, for example, how to build structures that will last for hundreds of years to house people, so we can actually give homes to people. So when people have it in their hearts, we can see it works really well. We're cooperating, we're thinking about workflow, we think about the environment, we want to keep our tools clean. It's just amazing. It's so in opposition to how I used to work for a non-profit organization that said they had these community ideals in a constitution, but it wasn't in the people's hearts. And when I started seeing the discrepancy, I was like, well, I'm just going to volunteer for God's way, because that's teaching me so much about love of people and the environment and the community principle. Community in the sense of we all have like minds and like hearts. And I think this is the biggest problem when we are so addicted to our own views and opinions. We never literally want to see the goodness in and how nature is designed. And I think that's what's missing. And I think if people want to love, that's going to be your biggest thing. Look for a group that's like, I'm dedicated to this because I want to love my fellow brothers and sisters, and I want to actually love the environment. So one of the projects Jesus and Mary designed to help us progress is the removal of environmental weeds to assess our sincerity to love. And I tell you what, weeding was like my biggest hate that I've ever had. And I came to this organization and I was like, oh my God, this is challenging me on every level. And now my favorite job is weeding. Weeding, not just weeding out of the garden, but out of the environment, introduced species that are causing a lot of problems. In Australia, as you can imagine, we've got a lot of introduced species. But the love of that job has been the growing from hating the idea of it to developing the heart and knowing that I want to love the environment and I want to do everything possible in my heart towards it. That change has been the biggest change in my life. It's been the biggest gift that I've ever received besides the teachings from Jesus and Mary, because this was the principles in action. If I can love the environment, I can also love humans then. It can't work any other way.
I have to say, John, thank you for that question, to be able to unlock that conversation with you, Sandra. I think so much in this world going forwards, looking at where we're going to be in the future, what is needed, where we're going to play our role, what the world is going to look like. We have so many questions. We have all this conversation about AI in a technical world, and I've been really leaning into what are we actually going to need, and so no one really talks about love, and actually that is what we need.
Yeah, the number one
Like
thing we need.
we're going to need love,
Yes.
and I think that's why I'm motivated by it. And actually, I never talked about love. You know, I've got three wonderful people that we work with here, Catherine and Johnny and Karen. And why do we come and do this? You know, why do we come and compost every week in the rain and it's like sludgy food waste? You know, what drives somebody to do
Yeah,
that? And it is love, you know,
that's
and it's
right.
that connection. Um, and I
Yeah.
think that is something that I would love, John, thank you for starting that. And I would love to explore this more about working together, working ways, you know, I've kind of trained in permaculture, and part of that is this kind of sense of, you know, people care, fair share, and how it's about sort of like a psychology of a group as well, isn't it? And actually not the constitution, it's beyond the policy, beyond the constitution. It's
Yeah.
actually like this call today, where we're working with a Wi-Fi that we predicted wasn't going to be so good. So we thought we'll accept, we'll have patience, we'll have hope, connect anyway. We'll see how we go. We'll just bring our energy to make this work. And it has for an hour. And why is that? You know, our shared energies have made this work, I believe, and a bit of tech. um, how did you grow your community?
It was set up with a constitution about giving to the world and love, particularly God's love is the driving factor. And then Jesus and Mary and a couple of other people decided that they want to incorporate it as an educational place for people to come to. So the main principle of it is that when things go wrong, like planting trees in dirt that we would have to look after and feed and baby these trees, and the whole purpose of it is for it to give rather than us putting more and more input into it over time. It gets addressed straight away. So, hey, this is an issue of love. Say someone's dangerous and they're not being safe. This is an issue because it creates problems in the organization, and safety is a must in everything we do. We don't want people getting harmed. So it's all about really caring for people first and foremost and ensuring that the environment is safe. not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and sexually. So everyone is safe. So it's just that those principles, those driving principles of how to love and what love isn't. And we learn by making mistakes. We do very unloving things at times. Even people that are just learning to be leaders, for example, and they acknowledge that. And just basically that if there's an argument, we sort it out. Because, people often bring, and that happens as well here, where we have people come and oftentimes they have outside of the organization problems between each other. And rather than dealing with those problems and taking responsibility for them, they don't do that. And seriously, it just happens. That's human condition at the moment. So we work on those so that the work that we do together can improve and workflow can improve and we can achieve way more than what we currently do. But there's always room for improvement, just like with the soil. When the seeds of love are sown, and if we decide to cultivate them, things have just amazing outcomes. And if we ignore them and decide, no, I'm going to be stubborn on this because I want my way, things fall apart. And that's just right. That's what happens in every workplace, every school, every organization. So this is our primary thing. Like if we love and we learn as to what love is, because not many of us on earth know what it is because we haven't been taught, and knowing that we are learning, and that's okay.
Thank you. I mean, I recognize it's on the hour, and I know, Sandra, you are deep in the depths of dark bedtime. It's the evening for you over there in Australia. But would you like to leave us with any one thought at the end of this talk, which might be the, beginning of many more potentially, but at the end, as we say goodbye at this one, is there anything you'd like to leave us with in particular?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, guys, for coming. I feel so grateful that you've turned up on your Sunday morning. I feel so grateful to you, and I feel so grateful to Vicky to continue the impetus to keep having these chats. If you have ideas as to what you would like to hear more about, I invite you to ask Vicky, and we might come up with another one of these webinars or something like that. And just thanks for being a part of this desire to do something different, the desire to love, because this is how you're demonstrating your desire to love. But I think just thinking about these concepts we've touched upon today, how can I give to the ground, to the earth? How can I do this in a smaller scale, and then just watching and experimenting, and you're already doing that. But when people just start, it's an exciting journey. And I think the more people that share that as well, I see that we could live in a way in the future where people that produce food are looked after and cared for, so they don't have to worry about their well-being, so that they are taken care of. But we, people that, for example, that don't want to be doing the growing, would be supporting them. Unfortunately, it's so ironic, isn't it, that food production is the most devastating to our earth. The most trees get cut down, the most carbon gets released, the most damage to the soil gets created. And I think taking us away from technology is another great way to get out there and actually get kids going in this. And I know it's difficult. It's very difficult. It's a whole social problem at the moment. How can we become human again rather than AI driven, heart driven rather than technology driven? So those two things, I think ag and technology, if we can just keep those as like, how can we change that for the future? I think we've got a long way to share the world with future generations, but nothing's is as important as love.
Sandra, that's just honestly a wonderful way to end it. Thank you so much for like a totally inspiring conversation on a Sunday morning. I feel really, really rejuvenated for today, and I'm going to go to my allotment this afternoon, even if it's raining over here as well, and just continue that mulching that I'm doing, which does look chaotic and a mess as well, but like lean into that. Absolutely. We've got here a message in the chat. Jonathan said, thank you so much. That was amazing. That's from Johnny, our wonderful volunteer. Thank you, Johnny, Carol, John, Catherine, Karen, Mangala, you're all very special. Thank you for being here. We're going to put it on YouTube so you can replay it or share it with friends and people that didn't manage to come today that wanted to. Sandra, thank you for so much of what you've shared with us today, and let's continue the conversation.
Thank you, lovely people. Thank you so much, Vicky. You're wonderful. Love you, and see you next time.